Anyway, let's get back to more serious issues, because 1 month ago today, Hamas terrorists launched their attack on southern Israel. Some 1,400 Israelis were murdered and over 200 taken hostage into the Gaza Strip. Israel responded with a ground invasion of Gaza, which shows no sign of slowing down. Some 10,000 Palestinians have been killed since the start of the invasion, but that is according to the health ministry in Gaza, which is run by the Hamas terrorists. Well, joining me to talk about this in more detail is former Foreign Secretary Sir Malcolm Rifkind. Good morning to you, Sir Malcolm.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. It is an incredible thing that it is a month ago today that this horrific terror attack unfolded on Israeli territory. And my guest here this morning in the studio, Tom Slater, was saying it's amazing how much it sort of almost has been sort of written over by the horrors of what we are seeing in Gaza as a result of the bombardment by Israeli forces in response to that. But there seems to often be some sort of moral equivalence given. If you were Foreign Secretary right now, what would you be thinking today?
Well, the first point I would make is that the events of a month ago still have the harshest possible reality for the 200 or whatever number it is Israeli hostages that were taken on that day, ordinary men, women and children, and for their families and for their friends and so forth. So we're not just talking about a historical event a month ago. This is still a matter of the most intense anguish for those who suffered on that day.
Yes, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? If this had happened on British territory, we wouldn't be going, oh, well, now let's move on now to what's going on in Gaza. That is simply not what would be happening, and no other country would be expected to do that. In terms of the UN Secretary General, it's António Guterres, he said yesterday that he believes that Gaza is now, he says, a graveyard for children. Hamas, who run the health ministry, say that some 4,000 children have been among the 10,000 who have died. Their figures, we can't verify their figures. They are a terrorist organisation. We know undoubtedly thousands have died, but we can't verify the exact figure. Is he right to describe Gaza in such terms?
Well, I thought that was an unnecessarily emotional and one-sided remark he was making, and probably an inaccurate one. First of all, to say Gaza is a graveyard for children implies that somehow, yes, there will be men, women and children who have died, civilians, as a result of the war that's going on at the moment. No one disputes that. But to imply that somehow the Israelis are deliberately targeting children or other innocent people is grossly untrue. And the Secretary General of the United Nations should not use language that implies, however unintentionally, otherwise.
But is it unintentional? We know what he said before. I mean, he's angered the Israelis before. They've been saying in response that actually he's part of the UN is part of the problem here.
Well, that may be in part true in terms of the rhetoric that is used. What the Secretary General of the United Nations, who is supposed to be 100% impartial in these matters, he'd be perfectly entitled to say, are the Israelis doing all within their power to minimize the number of civilian casualties, including women and children who might be inadvertently hurt or injured or killed? But to imply some sort of equivalence between people who are killed not deliberately, but get caught up in a war, which has happened in every single war, including wars that the United Kingdom has been involved in, and every other civilized country in the world. To imply that that somehow has any equivalence at all to a deliberate targeting of women and children, which is what Hamas were responsible for. This is not just a claim. They boasted about it. Yeah. They showed their own videos on television of people being tortured and killed. So they're the equivalent of ISIS. And no one disputed that there was only one response possible to that. And you made the very important point just a few moments ago. Imagine it had been during the IRA period. The IRA were bad enough, but imagine if they had deliberately carried out the kind of mindless killing, targeted killing and brutal killing of innocent people. Of course, the whole of the British population would have demanded that the army and the military forces were used to eliminate them as the organization they were. So there ought to be equivalence here, not a lack of criticism of Israel, but some balance that is sometimes amiss.
Yeah, and I mean, we've been discussing that, I mean, almost, solidly for the last month because of the strangely high expectations of Israel that they're expected to hold which are not expected of any other country at all. What are your hopes that this can be resolved, well, anytime soon, or indeed at all? You know, you are not just Foreign Secretary, you're also Defence Secretary.
Sure.
If they're going to be going in, and we're told possibly within the next 24 hours, already dividing the Gaza Strip into sort of north and south, hopefully most of the civilians now in the south, but again, still facing some bombardment. But if they are going to go into Gaza City on the ground, as it appears they will be proper in the next 24 hours or so, Israel said they have to wipe out Hamas. They have to be gone, basically, from the planet for this not to happen again to Israel. What are the chances?
Again, the rhetoric sometimes overdoes it. Hamas is not going to be destroyed in the sense of every single member of Hamas being killed or whatever Mr. Netanyahu might occasionally say. But what they have a very good prospect of achieving, the Israelis, is to so severely damage the military capability, the terrorist capability of Hamas, so that the kind of events we saw a month ago cannot be repeated. And that, of course, means that Hamas is no longer able to expect to be recognized as the administration of Gaza any more than ISIS were recognized as being a caliphate in northern Iraq or northern Syria.
A very fair point. Sir Malcolm Rifkind, I'm just going to interrupt you just this moment, just those who are watching will be able to see we just got footage of the King in the state coach, beautiful gilded coach, surrounded, of course, by his guardsmen, leaving Buckingham Palace, going onto the Mall, ahead of arriving at the Houses of Parliament to give his very first King speech as the King. Of course, last May, he gave it in place of the late Queen because she was unwell. But we've just seen the huge, big, stagecoach and all of the pomp and the ceremony. We're certainly seeing full pomp and ceremony today. We'll keep, obviously, our audience abreast of what is going on there. And of course, we'll take that speech live in, probably about 45, 50 minutes' time. So apologies, Sir Malcolm, to interrupt that. Of course, the events in the UK still continue. Let me ask you also about events here in the UK in relation to Israel and Gaza. We've had every week since October the 7th, these pro-Palestinian marches getting bigger and bigger. Some of the claims, by the way, of some of the organisers are pretty laughable. 1 million people here and there. About 100,000 people there on the streets. We are seeing some pretty unpleasant scenes and some very unpleasant banners and slogans being shouted. What do you make of the Metropolitan Police effectively pleading with the organisers to call off this Saturday's march that's due to take place on Armistice Day?
Well, I don't think it's a question of pleading. I think it's a question of asking the organisers of the march. They can have their march any other day of the week. They have a right to march if they want to. Mm-hmm. That's their democratic right. But they also have an obligation to respect the sensitivities, particularly of Armistice Day, the most important day in our calendar, commemorating those who died during the First and Second World Wars. Now, I think it's not unreasonable
that the organisers won't turn up, but then you'll get sort of a ragtag group of people and things could just turn very nasty.
That is by far preferable if the organisers themselves use some common sense and a sense of decency. They know perfectly well that they can have their march a day before or the day after. It's the same march in effect in terms of expressing their point of view. So if they refuse to do that, then the police have a legal obligation to consider public order and whether that is appropriate. Yeah. And I understand the protesters are saying, well, they won't march in central, near the cenotaph. They'll go from Hyde Park to the American Embassy. That is still central London. So my own view would be that at the very least, they should be prevented by law from having any demonstration in central London on the Friday or the Saturday or the Sunday.
People are saying that Armistice Day, we mark the fallen, those who sacrificed their lives, to give us our democratic rights, including to march. But you're saying it's not an absolute right. It doesn't mean you can march where you want, when you want, on any day of the year.
Well, of course, that's right, because the rest of the public have rights as well. And the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who want to show respect for those, sometimes their own immediate family, who lost their lives during the war. That also is a right in the same sense that we use that term. Now, I am not for a moment suggesting that people who wish to argue for the Palestinian point of view should not be allowed to march. Of course they must. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that they choose the place, the time, and anybody else's interests can be ignored. Yeah.
That would be an absurd at a train station. I mean, when we saw those horrific scenes of a veteran 78-year-old poppy seller claiming that he was punched, and some footage of him being pushed and shoved, claiming he was punched in the back by protesters at Edinburgh Waverley Station. I mean, that is so beyond unacceptable.
Can I just make a point, though? I mean, it is right for the news media, including yourselves and newspapers, to reflect some of the ghastly things that individuals have been doing. We must get this in perspective. There are probably tens of thousands of people who want to march in favor of the Palestinian point of view. Probably 9,500 of them, 9,800 of them are law-abiding people wishing to express a point of view.
Yeah, no, we've always made that point in this show, that the vast majority.
I know you have. I know you have. But I'm making the point I want to make is that sometimes the public, who don't go into this in the detail that you do or people like myself do, might think that somehow there's vast numbers of people in Britain who are full of hate and wanting to commit either anti-Muslim or anti-Semitic incidents. The vast majority of these incidents are created by individual foolish, stupid people. They are not representative of the general public.
Very fair point to make. Sir Malcolm Rifkind, so appreciate you joining us, former Foreign Secretary, former Defence Secretary. Thank you for that.